Hello folks, this is Bizarre Monkey of the Crazy Chimp Collective, and today we're going to be talking about Tristy. Tristy Heels to be exact. Ready your ears and prepare your bootstraps. This is Law Spore. From face value, Tristy appears simply as a shrewd victim of past solace, whose bitterness with society has made her rather callous and wary of those who try to get close to her. But that's only a first impression. In this video, we get behind the ears and into the mush that makes our little hopping hermit so intriguing. Keep in mind that this video will have major lore spoilers, so if you want to actually experience the character firsthand, it may be best to do so by playing the fucking game she most prominently features in, Intelligence 314th Clash. We first meet Tristy in battle, where she makes an only slightly showy entrance, which Pepper marks on, following with calling her Sheila, which is a bogan term for woman, and is mostly frowned upon. Tristy lightly reprimands it, and states her real name, and Pep eagerly obliges to call her by that instead, because he's not a rude prick. While she seems mildly stubborn and antisocial at first, Tristy quickly warms up to people. Deep down she does not strive for solace, and her life is almost always in a state of self-contradiction. She also isn't very adept in social situations, mistaking Rolly, of all people's goofy flappy ears comment, as an attack on her, rather than the more friendly benign way Rolly intended it. She has a long history, and most of her actions correlate to it somewhat. So, what happened? Well, until very recently, documentation on Tristy's past had been very scarce. We knew at a very young age she was responsible for a huge victory over Moore, and purchasing through said victory unification among mammals, and was the impetus for the treaty with an absurdly cheesy name. That is to say, the Treaty of Super Happy Fun Times, which made some laws and reforms to mammalian justice system and the rights of mammals in general. One of the more controversial but nonetheless very important changes was the meat industry going under. To be as fair and all-willingly functional members of society as possible, ambassadors of the race who signed said treaty were forbidden from eating any other races who also signed. Only two known exceptions exist: fish and wolves. Fish because they were still too dumb to comprehend what that meant, and wolves because they're kind of assholes. They vanished from the, well, everything, though Perseverance adherence does show that at least as of 1099, they are still around, but are unsurprisingly hostile. So, back to Tristy, it's implied that she at some point decided to vanish from society, and often seems forgetful, choosingly, of her past of fame. Due to the recent release of Trusting Hardships, which delves into her two life-changing relationships, we can gauge about when and what caused this. Firstly, she was obviously keen to forget she was famous even before her first relationship. Rex didn't ever seem to know that she was a trustworthy heroine, though in his defense, he's not incredibly smart or perceptive. Tristy's first relationship was with an overpowering, probably abusive alcoholic. Her next was almost accidental, but also because of that, a lot easier to get into. Nasha Blueberry was everything Rex wasn't: kind, smart, sassy, and concerned with Tristy's well-being. By the end of Trusting Hardships, both had passed away, leaving Tristy a bittersweet victory, and likely heartbroken. It's at this point that she decides to leave society behind. However, on doing so, she gets to deal with the problems she faces all throughout the game of Intelligence. Tristy puts on a bubbly facade, but she's rarely genuinely happy. Tristy, due to her service in the Great War, or War of Indifference, at her young age, and then the containment of one of the most mentally toxic creatures in the universe, an ancient one, has a lot of dark minutiae that society sought to distract her from. She does her best not to dwell on it, and seems complacent to accept it as her cut of the crop for possessing an absurd amount of intelligence. But her ways of dealing with it aren't often so orthodox. In the first two acts of the game, Tristy plays completely shy to the fact that she seems to acquire furniture and rather expensive things from nowhere. For instance, the balcony of her house out west has 3 nice couches, as well as a comfortable bed, and downstairs has a lot of rather expensive looking furniture. Considering she does not seem to be particularly wealthy, it's one of those questions that isn't really gone into, and the player may assume it's just a lazy ploy by the developer to not have to think much about house economics, and instead use all those pretty tiles he has. However, not long into Act 3, Tristy does start acting rather aloof, and seems ready to snap off Origin's head just for speaking. Her paranoia about the omniscient largely stems from an irritation, and that irritation would have likely been Rex. He was probably the sort to gloat. But after some absolute bullshit, she decides for her sake, and the sake of her comrades' trust, who she'd become incredibly attached to at this point, that she'd tell them the truth. She at first seems pissed off, but it's quickly revealed it's not anyone but herself she's disgusted with. She stated that she wouldn't feel bad if she'd kept it as her own sort of problem, but she convinced Pep and Rolly to follow the same habits, which made her very ill with herself. Pep, of course, didn't actually really give a shit, and more or less blew it off as her blowing shit out of proportion like pretty much always, and Rolly didn't even really see wrong in it. You gotta eat, yo. However, this, as Pep's first said, explains a hell of a lot. She's not rich, and even when she was, she didn't stop. She stated she may have kleptomania, but Pep questions that as well, and states there's probably more to it than self-indulgence. And he'd be right. Stealing never made Tristy happier, and material wealth, acquired in any sort of fashion, didn't appeal to Tristy at all, and later she did consider and more or less realized later on that it was indeed another distraction from her other mental issues, of which she has many. The amount of odd shit surrounding Tristy is pretty fucking absurd. Firstly, she never knew her parents or her name. Tristy Heels is something she decided to call herself after she was done being the trustworthy heroine, and she needed some ID, or identification. The Heels part of her name may have even been an accident. She may have meant it to be heels, as in the heels of your feet, but decided that what she was given would work. Secondly, Tristy was involved heavily in two humongous conflicts, the War of Indifference and the battle against the Frost Lord, which led to his containment. Thirdly, she was subject to the fame from being such a pivotal force behind those two things, and it seems she has no love for fame or the sort of attention it brings at all, as she makes every effort to forget or disassociate herself from it. Fourth, she's had two life-changing relationships that have both largely impacted her, in good ways and bad, and as a result, she fifthly secluded herself from society for a very long time after that fact, and is now due to that one of the last of her species, thus her unofficial title of the Lost Kangaroo. Pep and Rolly were beacons of hope for her, and she quickly placed her trust in them because trust is, sort of her thing. Finally, Tristy suffers largely from existential thinking, and dwells largely in a land of uncertainty. Her avarice for knowledge continually serves to punish her, then to get some peace of mind, she goes to Herculean lengths to find answers, only to be bittersweetly rewarded with more questions. The final fights of intelligence are more than anything her coming of age. She's fighting all she fears, all her anxiety, all her existential fears. She's fighting as literally as you can. I mean, the end boss is the aspect of a rager for fiddle's sake. In the ending, it's revealed Tristy's dream job was to become a member of the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, which, just like the version we know, clearly dabbles with interdimensional beings and extraterrestrials on a common basis. I mean, why wouldn't they? Tristy's coming of age comes late in her perceived life, in comparison to her comrades. She's almost as old as Pep's mother, and is 48 before the hour of infinity draws nigh, which is just a stupid, edgy way of saying age no longer matters because the cycle of life and death is over, or no more. She comes across a fair bit younger than her age at the start of intelligence, mostly due to a lack, or more unlack, of social experience. So where is she at now? Mentally. We don't really know, let's be honest. She seems happy at the end of the 14th Clash, but for us, unlike her, questions still remain. Will she ever really know happiness? Does she even care about that now? What she is now is happy with her company, and Pep and Rolly's continued support for her will likely mean she'll never get into that sort of state she was in previously, but beyond that, answers are like grasping straws at best. It's been hinted at that she may have a large role in the very vague and nascent planned future project, code-named Release, which delves largely into existential unease. It's teased in the secret ending of Intelligence 3 14th Clash, and briefly elsewhere as well, such as in the depraved lunacy optional boss fight. In conclusion, That's all you really need and probably should care to know about Tristy Heels, the trustworthy heroine, the lost kangaroo. If you liked this video, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe to Crazy Chimp Collective for more like it, and various other videos of another sort, hopefully without my ingratiatingly terrible voice and cheesy accent that isn't real. This has been Dystopian Cosmos Into the Lore Spore Episode 1. Bizarre Monkey out.